Welcome back to another edition of the Here We Go podcast. I am your host, Trent Ging. Had a guest on last night. Not sure if you caught that episode yet. It was a longer episode. We covered a lot of good stuff. Colin Phillips was on with me. Feel free to check that one out because that was a good one. I thought there was a lot of good back and forth, a lot of good discussion on that one. So if you haven't watched that episode yet, please check that one out. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of the last two rooms that I haven't covered yet. We're going to talk about the cornerback room. Now, Joey Porter Jr. is obviously going to be the staple of this room. He's the guy that we're going to build this room around moving forward. He has definitely shown in his rookie season that he can be a true number one. He's a shadow cover guy. He's sticky in man coverage. He's got a couple of things to clean up a little bit. For example, he's very handsy, and it's cost him some penalties already. As you build that reputation, it's something that the officials will watch a little more closely. So he's got to learn to utilize his hands effectively, but not grab. And if he does that, I mean, he's very good in press coverage with that. So that's just one of the things he's going to need to clean up a little bit. It's just watching the way he utilizes his hands and not being somebody who's going to start getting a reputation of being a grabby corner that, is going to draw a lot of pass interference penalties. Another thing that I've noticed that he does, when he does try to get that initial punch in, he does lean a little forward, which can create some issues because if he misses, he's immediately behind the receiver. Doesn't happen to him often, but it's just something to keep an eye on, especially when a guy's coming off the line of scrimmage and he's in, right there a yard away. If a guy gives him a fake to the inside, he'll bite to that inside. And sometimes he'll miss on his punch when he's trying to actually change the timing of a route. So that one's more of a minor thing. The hands are obviously the biggest issue with him. But I think you like what you saw out of him as a rookie. There's not too many guys that are going to have a much better rookie season. And I think the way that you look at him is going to be dependent on how you evaluate the position. So there are some people who don't necessarily think his year was as good as others due to the fact that he played a lot of backup quarterbacks. I'm always somebody who's really kind of focused first around where they are in coverage. His coverage was pretty spectacular for the most part. He struggled with DK Metcalf because DK Metcalf is just a monster. He's not only big, he's physical, he's strong. He has about 40 pounds almost on Joey Porter Jr. So there's a big size advantage, and the things that Joey likes to do, DK Metcalf is able to take away with how physical he is. So that's another thing. As Joey progresses in his career, he's going to learn how to adapt to players like that he can't just be physical at the line of scrimmage with. That he's going to have to find other ways to affect his routes and affect his timing so that he stays in good coverage, because he that was definitely his worst game. The DK Metcalf coverage just did not go well for him. So I think it's something he'll learn from. I think it's something that he'll get better with. But for the most part, if you just look at his placement on routes with these receivers, sticky coverage is a way of looking at what he did last year. I mean, there are guys that are in tight coverage. There's guys in good coverage. Sticky coverage to me is you're on their hip throughout the entire route. And I thought that term could be applied to Joey Porter Jr. for the most part last year. Even a game against Jamar Chase, he really was right there with him. And I thought that one was the one that was really telling, because Chase he's got some physicality to his game, but he's not nearly as big as a DK Metcalf. He's a good route runner, and if you're going to get beat by somebody, he's the guy you're definitely going to get beat by. And I thought Joey played really, really well. I mean, the biggest play that Chase had in that game was kind of a fluke play off a tip ball where it just happened to end up in his hands. So, again, I understand the argument of the backup quarterbacks. But to be perfectly honest with you, there's times as a corner, you can be in perfect position. You can play the ball perfectly in the air, and the quarterback just makes a throw that's absolutely ridiculous and is going to beat you no matter what you do. Sometimes there's going to be athletic receivers that, again, you can be in perfect coverage, just like in training camp. He was in perfect coverage against George Pickens, and Pickens goes up and makes a ridiculous catch on him. Those are things you can't help as a corner. When I'm looking at him, I kind of look at him in the same light that I looked at Ike Taylor, a guy that you can say, you're going to go man-to-man. You're going to shut down one half of the field. And I don't expect a ton of turnovers out of Joey. He's never been a guy who's created a lot of turnovers. I mean, he didn't have any in college. He had one last year on a pretty horrific throw by Lamar Jackson, if we're being perfectly honest. Odell didn't really make a great attempt to break that ball up. I'm not sure what he could have done because it was just a horrendous throw. You're going to see one, maybe two interceptions a season out of Joey, and I think you live with that because of the way he plays coverage. He needs to get better as a tackler. And those are things that I think all of his deficiencies right now are things that you expect to see a growth in year two. They're fixable. The things that you can't teach, he's already good at. So you got your number one, and I think you feel really comfortable with your number one. Now, last year's pieces around him were just so bad. I mean, Levi Wallace, I don't know how many times I was cussing at my TV last year watching that guy play. Felt like every touchdown, you either saw 29 or 20. It was Levi Wallace or it was Patrick Peterson. And they're throwing their hands up like somebody else should have been there. But in reality, they were just getting torched. So there was nowhere to go but up across from Joey Porter Jr. You weren't going to get worse this offseason. So they make a trade. And this is going to be a storyline throughout the entire season because of the trade, not because of the player involved in the trade who came over here. Dante Jackson comes over from Carolina. He's a guy who does have some different traits from Joey Porter Jr., but the storyline is always going to be he was traded for Deontay Johnson. It was a player swap and a pick swap. And it really honestly played out like a talent for talent type trade. But in my opinion, this was not a talent for talent type trade. This was more of a grudge trade is what I would refer to it as. Omar Khan basically trying to send Deontay Johnson to purgatory more so than worrying about what we got back in return. Dante Jackson has been a guy who doesn't stay healthy for an entire season. So that's going to be the one thing that now you have to worry about what depth is behind him. He's also a guy who has a tendency to get beat deep. Now, he has good speed. So there's some traits about him that play well with Joey Porter Jr. So if you're looking for a silver lining in this thing, he is faster than Joey. So I look at a game against maybe a Baltimore with a guy like Zay Flowers that if Joey struggles because of the speed, you can kind of flip-flop the matchup and let Dante Jackson run with Flowers, and Dante can run with Flowers. That part I like. He has played man coverage, like shadowing type coverage, same as what we saw from Joey last year throughout his career. So he has that in his bag. But he also seems to play better in zone than he does in man. Now, we run a lot of zone. So from that standpoint, you think he should be a guy who could fit in this defense. And he seems to be a better tackler than Joey Porter Jr. I mean, you can't have both guys on the outside who just can't tackle. So hopefully, from your second corner spot, you don't see a situation. I think back to the Browns game when DTR was playing in Cleveland. Levi Wallace crashes all the way down to the end of the line of scrimmage, and the back cuts it back outside of him and ends up taking it, whatever it was, 56 yards for a touchdown. Jackson seems to be a guy who's a little more intelligent from that aspect. He played with a little bit better contain than what Wallace did on that play. And hopefully you don't get the same situation from that standpoint. He has created some turnovers throughout his career also. He's a guy who has respectable numbers as far as the interceptions he's gotten throughout his career. I think the health thing is going to be a huge factor. With the way that we're looking at using Minkah Fitzpatrick back in that deep role again where he can be the playmaker, I think he can help cover up the deficiencies that Jackson has. I'm not as worried about that as what I think a lot of other people are. Strictly because of Joey's going to take away one side of the field, presumably, which leaves Minkah to help over the top if Jackson gets beat. And I think quarterbacks are going to try to stay away from the Minkah Fitzpatrick ball hawking role that he's going to be playing. So I don't think Jackson as your number two is a bad thing. He's a clear upgrade from what we had. He's always going to get a bad rap because of the trade that he was involved in. But I'm personally going to try not to hold that against him because he had nothing to do with it. He was just the guy on the other end of that trade. So I would ask fans to kind of keep that in mind as you're going through this evaluation process of the defense, and specifically of how Jackson plays. Don't try to make him the defense's version of what Deontay Johnson meant to the offense. He's not the same guy. He's not that type of talent. He can be a solid number two. And if you're really comfortable with Joey as your number one, then you can feel okay that this guy's a stopgap type guy as your number two. You're looking to develop some young guys behind him. If they don't develop, you're going to go get a guy in the draft next year to hopefully be his replacement. Because I don't think that he's here beyond this season. I could be wrong on that one, but I just don't think that they look at him as a long-term option. So since injuries are a concern for him, what's behind him? Well, as of right now, it's a lot of unknown. It's Corey Trice Jr., who didn't even make it to really seeing what he can do in pads last year. He didn't play in a preseason game. You don't really know what you have with him. He's had some injury history. And I think his injury history gets blown a little bit out of proportion because, yeah, he had a season-ending injury last year. He had one in college, and he had an ankle. But that people seem to make it out like he and Peyton Wilson are on the same playing field, and they're really not as far as injuries are concerned. I think that Corey Trice, there was a reason he was drafted where he was. I think the injury did knock him down a little bit in the draft. But he, by all of the reports that were coming out last year before his injury, there were some people making a case that he looked better than Joey Porter Jr. did in training camp down in Latrobe. They thought he was actually, at the time, looking like the better of the two corners. Now, one of the things that people did say about him is he's very fluid for his size. And I think that's where all the optimism started to kind of creep up, that maybe they found a real diamond in the rough here, because you find him late in the draft. If he looks like a very fluid cover corner, maybe this is a guy you can develop. But here we are now in his second season, and because of the injury, we're still in that same wait and see type moment. Like, what's he going to be? Will he make it through camp? Will he play preseason? Will he look good in preseason? I think one thing that we need to see, and I'm hoping to see, which is going to be interesting because of Jackson being new to the team, I want to see these young guys playing the ones in preseason. I don't want to see them playing against the twos, the threes, the fours, the guys who aren't going to make rosters, the guys who are more special teams type players. I don't want to see that. I want to see them against the number ones in preseason, because I think that's where you start to get a fair evaluation of where these guys are. Another guy that's built very similar to Corey Trice Jr. and to Joey Porter Jr. is Darius Rush. Now, Rush is the guy who came in late last season. He was plucked off Kansas City's practice squad. And I think he kind of came in and played really safety a little bit in that first game, and a little bit of slot corner, which he's pretty big to play inside, which was interesting to me that he was playing inside at all, especially without really getting a chance to learn the defense. So I don't know that you can take what you saw from him last year and say that you know very much about him. Now he's getting a full offseason to really learn and understand what this defense is all about. Can he develop? He was a little bit of a higher pick. I think he went in the fourth round. So third and fourth round guys are typically depth guys. They're not starters. But the team's identified something in him that they like. And I think they're really trying to just let he and Corey Trice fight it out for that backup role. And I'm not sure what they're going to do, if they're going to kind of do what I feel like they're going to do with Nick Herbig, where you're just the number 3 period, and it doesn't matter what side of the field you play on. Or are they going to identify that these guys are better on one side of the field than the other? And what does that look like as far as rotational pieces behind? Who's going to be in that dime package? Do either of these guys fit in the nickel package? There's so much unknown with these two young guys right now that it has to be sorted out once the pads come on in Latrobe. It has to be sorted out throughout the preseason. And I feel like because there's just so much unknown with these two, I really want to see them playing against some ones instead of just being guys that come in with the second wave and see what they're capable of. So we're going to see how that one plays out. It's just there's too much unknown to really make any decisions. But it's also, by that same token, there's too much unknown to feel really good about where the depth is. You can't feel good about the depth in that room because you don't know what you have in the room. So if a guy like Jackson goes down, or if something happens to Joey Porter Jr. goes down, there's going to be a lot of nervous fans out there because we're not sure what to expect. Now, I'm going to lump the slot corners into this group as well. I don't feel like it's a position that really needs a full episode on its own. So right now, we know off the bat, we signed Cam Sutton, taking the sideshow of that thing out of the picture for a moment. Cam Sutton's a very good player. He's a very solid player, and he made his name as a slot corner in Pittsburgh. He's a guy you can feel really good about running out there in that position again and expecting him to play well. He's also not going to be here for probably 6 weeks. We'll see what that suspension looks like once it's actually announced. But he's going to miss a significant amount of time. So now you're going to have to look at starting the season out with somebody not named Cameron Sutton. So before I move on to the next guys, let me say this. There is a very real chance that after the suspension is over, if something were to happen to Joey Porter Jr. or Dante Jackson, Cameron Sutton could move outside. He does bring versatility to play outside. He played well. He wasn't great, but he played pretty well outside his last season in Pittsburgh. That's why he got a big contract from the Lions. Now, that didn't work out in Detroit. He didn't have the same level of success that he had when he was with Pittsburgh. But he's a guy I think you could feel comfortable. He's more of a known commodity, I should say, if you moved him outside as opposed to the guys that we have right now as depth on the outside. So if something happens and Jackson misses a game, 2 games, 3 games, whatever it is, as long as it's not in these first 6 weeks, I think right now it would shock me if the team didn't move Cam Sutton outside. Unless these young guys show something throughout this preseason. Today, I'd say Cam Sutton move outside. So who's going to start? It seems to really be down to right now, and what can change? This is still very early on. But right now, it seems like Josiah Scott and Beanie Bishop are kind of like the 1 and 2 in the room as far as looking at who could start. And I'm shocked by how much buzz Beanie Bishop is getting. Now, Scott's a guy who, we picked up kind of later in the process in the free agency, and he is a guy he's a veteran who could pick up this defense probably pretty quickly. He's played for the Eagles. But Beanie Bishop's been the guy getting a ton of buzz. Says he models this game after Mike Hilton. Made a number of plays already in camp. It's football in shorts. He's built very similar to Mike Hilton. He's a guy that's very intriguing, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think of the camp battles that are going on, there's going to be a lot of like the big time battles that you're really going to focus on, quarterback being one of them, how do the left tackle, right tackle situations play out, who's going to get that wide receiver 2 spot, do we make a move there, or one of the guys already on the team. You're going to look at a lot of different position groups and just try to see how things play out. But this one to me is the one that I'm like really interested in watching just because of how much buzz this kid is getting. And it's interesting to me that he's not making mistakes. I mean, I've heard not just one, but numerous people talk about Beanie Bishop not looking like a rookie so far. So I think that's the one I'm really interested in kind of keeping an eye on as camp goes on, the pads come on, and does he start making some of the rookie mistakes once the pads are on and the hitting is live? I think that's the time, too, when rookies can make a mistake because they're just overly excited to prove themselves. And so you'll overplay something on the coverage. You'll run yourself out of position when you're trying to make a play in the run game. And that might be where Scott's experience comes into play. But, man, it's really intriguing to see a guy like Beanie Bishop. And I tend to root for underdogs. So a guy who's a little undersized, who was undrafted, is like right up my alley. I'm not a big WVU guy, but he's a local kid too. So that brings a little bit of intrigue from that standpoint as well. A lot of people who are Pitt fans, I'm sure, know more about Beanie Bishop than I do. I watch more of the Big Ten in college than I watch of anything else. So it's just really, really intriguing to see how that battle's going to go. So I don't necessarily hate the depth. I hate the unknown of the depth. You would almost like to have a veteran in there, but we had a couple of veterans last year that just looked awful. So maybe, who knows, maybe the team has evaluated something in these guys that they see that's better than what I'm seeing right now, and they feel more comfortable with what they have than what I do right now. That's why they get paid the big bucks, and that's why I'm not in there. I have nothing to do with any evaluation process. So I would say that this is going to be a room that I feel very comfortable with our starters. I would say when you're evaluating Jackson's season again, just take the Deontay trade out of the situation and evaluate him solely on his play on the field and what he brings to the table for this team. There's one thing that there can be a consensus on, is he's not worse than what we had last year. There's no way. So I'm comfortable with the starters. I really like Cameron Sutton as the slot. I think he kind of completes this defense. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see what plays out behind the starting group this year. So hope you like the episode. Tomorrow I'm going to break down the safeties. It'll be my last positional group, and we'll move on to some other things. If you enjoy this episode, like and share. As always, I hope you all have a great day.